Number one, looking only forward leads to a horrifying future. Right? I picture horses with blinders leading themselves, looking only forward to the glue factory. And this is what we're doing. We're avoiding what needs to be looked at. If you do not prosecute crimes, you do not deter crimes, now or in the future. And torture is ongoing. When prison guards have complete power over prisoners held outside of any legal context, they will torture if they do not think it will be punished. And they have been given every assurance it won't be punished. Imagine if it were. Imagine if it were being cracked down on now. If we still treated it as a policy question rather than a crime, it would be back. It would be back with this president in different circumstances or with a future president. But it would be back. You don't get rid of it by saying it's a policy and I choose not to engage in it now. Right? Leon Panetta made clear at his confirmation hearing that the president retains the power to torture. When Dick Cheney started complaining that Barack Obama maintained the power to torture, the shocked and outraged media went and asked Axelrod, and he refused to say otherwise, and refused to give a straight answer because of course they maintain the power to torture. This is what is involved in making it now a policy rather than a crime. What we are establishing, and the pretense that we aren't has almost vanished from the televisions, is two classes of people. People who have to obey laws, like you and me, and people who don't, who are largely the people who make the laws. So if this prosecution goes forward of bad apple torturers, which they have every intention that it not go forward at all, and by the way, the statutes of limitations are rapidly clicking away, it's going to be worse than nothing, because it's going to establish that a president can ask a lawyer to write a note secretly that says a blatant crime is legal and it is therefore legal. And then you prosecute people who stray from it, not people who adhere to it. So the door is open to expand this prosecution into something useful. And we can and we must work with Congress to do so. But we can't sit back, or it will be worse than nothing. One of the key arguments for not going forward, for not prosecuting Dick Cheney or George Bush or their subordinates or their lawyers for their crimes, any of their crimes, torture, aggressive war, illegal spying, any of the things that these secret memos were written to purport to legalize, is that doing so would enrage the right-wingers. Excuse me. They cannot be more enraged. Giving them 90% of what they want encourages them far more than fighting for justice and peace would do. They bring guns to rallies. They call the president a traitor and a socialist and a foreigner. You can't escalate that. You can't make that any worse than what it is. And you got to that point by giving them 90% of what they wanted, but not 100. That is how you enrage the right-wing rage machine. We are destroying international relations. Our State Department now can't tell other nations not to torture. In fact, has been told, who are you to talk? Spain is attempting to prosecute our lawyers, which is going to make for interesting international relations, and more power to them. We need to be helping them, some of us are. And it's not just torture, it's all of these crimes. Number two, relying on elections alone to solve anything gets us absolutely nowhere. Yes, you should vote. Yes, you should vote the right way. No, the fact that we haven't transformed and changed our nation does not mean you voted for the wrong guy or you should have voted for McCain. It means that you are imagining far more significance in an election, when what we have to be focused on is what we do as citizens in between elections. We have very, very little choice in our elections, which compounds the problem that elections are not the be-all and end-all of participatory democracy. We have money and party corruption that is extreme. We have gerrymandering of districts that almost guarantees permanent residency for incumbents. We have legalized bribery. We have the corporate media that fights democracy day in and day out. Even if we cleaned all of these things up, which we must, elections would be the very beginning of activism as citizens in our country. And all of the work that we do to go out and register voters, that is not activism. That is busy work. People should be registered to vote when they turn 18, just like they have Social Security. It is not rocket science. Failing to do it is creating this busy work and then this pseudo-activism that is not the activism that is primarily needed. And when we become active following an election, we are not being disrespectful. We are not behaving as if the person we wanted lost. We are behaving as citizens of a representative republic. To behave otherwise, to say, oh, well, we're going to sit back and give them a chance. That is appropriate following a coup, not an election. Following an election, you do your duty, you get out there and tell them how to represent you, because they don't know otherwise, and because the insurance companies and the oil companies are not letting up for a minute. So we can't. Number 3, if we have any chance at all of being represented in Washington, it is through the first branch of our government, which occupies the first 60% of our Constitution, and it's not the executive. It is the Congress. And I say this in D.C., where there is no voting representation in Congress, where there are no senators. This has to be changed. You know, you cannot elect the People's Party to strong majorities in both houses and the White House and be so intent on all defense all the time that you don't give the people of Washington, D.C., who are more numerous than the people of Wyoming, voting representation in our Congress. That being said, it is still a fact that even if you live in D.C., Congress is where your energies should go, and you have a duty to help those people who cannot get to D.C., who are thousands of miles away, much of the year, from their so-called representatives, to go and stand in and be representatives on their behalf with their Congress members and senators. If you try to say, well, we don't have a Congress member in D.C., or we have lousy Congress members from Virginia and Maryland, we're going to lobby the president. Let me tell you, the president can ignore not just your town, but entire regions of the nation and still get reelected. The president takes 10 times the money from any industry as any dozen Congress members or senators. The president is the focus of the corporate media every day, and the incredible corrupting influence that that is on anyone. The president isn't up for 4 years. And while it's very, very easy to find out where your Congress member will be and walk up to them and talk to their face, the president has something called the Secret Service working for him. It is not strategic to think that the primary target of our lobbying and activism is the executive, who is not supposed to make the laws. I wouldn't want him or her to have the power to make the laws, but is the Congress, which is subject to our influence much more easily than we think, and is where we want power to be. Of course, we have to force Congress, kicking and screaming, to accept power, because they delight in handing it over to the White House, and we have to impose power back on them against their concerted will. Right? They all, across the political spectrum in Congress, want the power in the White House, and especially the Democrats in Congress in those moments when the White House is occupied by a Democrat. Because the loyalty is not to a branch of government, or to our Constitution, or to peace and justice. It is to a party. despite the fact that the White House tends more often than not to be occupied by a Republican, and the Congress tends more often than not to be dominated by Democrats. We also are going to have to force Congress right now, those better members in the House, to vote no on a lousy bill that they've publicly committed to voting no on. We have enough progressive Democrats committed to voting no on any health care bill that does not include a serious, immediate public option, not a co-op, not a trigger, but a public option, to block the bill. And the assumption across the board in this town and all over the corporate media is that the progressives in Congress will cave, as always. It almost goes without saying. It's built into the conversation that they will. We have to fight that. No matter how weak the thing they've taken a stand on is, the fact that they've taken a stand is incredibly significant, and they cannot be permitted to back down. And when they don't, we have to demand that they take a stand for a real solution on health care, like single-payer health care, and on everything else. Number 4, we do not need, and hopefully I'm getting into some of those that some of you may disagree with. Number 4, we don't need more leadership from our president. Congress members whine and moan that the president is not writing the bills for them, is not ordering them to do a better job. They can't conceive of the idea of putting a good bill on his desk and forcing him to either veto it or sign it. Absolutely inconceivable to them. But we actually need the Congress to write the laws. To any extent that he has allowed Congress to write the health care bill, the president is correct in doing so. Sadly, it's not a very well-kept secret that he hasn't, that he has walked them down this road each step of the way, that any direction he's going to lead on health care is not a very good one. And if it were, it would be a matter of chance. It would be unreliable. It would be uncontrollable. We have no way of controlling what the president does, except in that moment of election, or of primary election, which itself is very, very weak. And if we allowed the president to simply have some trillions of dollars and do what he wants with it and solve health care on his own without this bothersome Congress, which has the nerve to have too many daughters and dogs to remember all their names and don't really behave like proper royalty, well, then the next president could just come in and undo it. Anything that we let a president simply do or undo, the next president can simply reverse. Number 5, we don't need better party discipline. Right? It's very tempting to say, geez, if the Democrats could control the worst Democrats, then they could at least push through some halfway health care bill that might be more good than harm. Yes, but if the Democrats had party discipline, there would be absolutely no opposition to wars in Congress. There would be absolutely no support for the majority position on most issues in Congress. So a better solution, and this may sound crazy and radical or innovative, would be to have Congress members represent their constituents and answer to them rather than to the leader of any party, no matter which party. When the progressives in the House self-censored and pre-compromised on health care and opened by asking for the lowest thing they would possibly accept, leaving no room to negotiate, when they said, we want the public option and that's our ideal, and then got the activist groups to go out and claim that was their ideal, and not just not push for single payer, but not talk about it, censor the word. This was a deal not made with Republicans. This was a deal made with the leadership of the Democratic Party and with Barack Obama. When George Miller, who supported single payer last year but not this year, tried to kill an amendment to allow states to do single payer, Barack Obama told him to do that. So party discipline is almost always a bad thing. And most of it comes through money. And so cleaning up the money is also a way to clean up parties, but it comes through other means as well. We're facing a disaster for the Democratic Party, which is not necessarily a disaster for Americans. That is, we have given them big majorities in 2 houses and the White House, and they're choosing not to do anything with it. And people are going to notice that. And it may result in people getting very angry, people crawling under their beds, people moving to Canada, people backing a third party, people backing the Republicans, all sorts of responses that I think would be less than ideal. I think the ideal response, and I think it's entirely possible, and has the potential to move us in a much better direction very quickly, would be if people decided to act as independent citizens rather than members of any party, and to hold accountable individual representatives based on their actions, regardless of party affiliation. This would be a very, very different world, where people did not take their marching orders from activist groups that went and asked Congress what Congress should be lobbied to do, which sort of turns us into props at pre-approved rallies, where people participated in democratically run organizations that set policy outside the Beltway and then brought their demands to the Beltway, where Congress members could make compromises, but citizens didn't make compromises and self-censor. This would be a remarkable development. Number 6, we now have a monarchy, or very, very close to it. We have laws made by signing statements, by executive orders, and by secret memos. And where we don't, we have laws made by the executive instructing Congress how to make the laws that will be executed by the executive, which is a reversal. We have the power of war in the hands of one person, and to always be in the hands of one elected despot from here on out. We have the power to create money and to spend money now, by example for which there has been no accountability, in the hands of one person. We have the power to make treaties and appointments independent of the Congress in the hands of one person. We have the power to keep secret or to selectively reveal the doings of our government in the hands of one person. The courts still have a little bit of a pulse on this. Congress is just about dead. We have habeas corpus gone after centuries of standing up to monarchy. Gone. We are not undoing preventive detention. We are formalizing it, systematizing it, papering over it with meaningless due process formalities. Gone. We have the military used at home, used in police actions, used for emergencies, used for immigration, and on hand to be used against United States citizens. Number 7, we need more people impeached, and we need the Capitol Police used more, not less, which is a strange thing to say for someone against whom the Capitol Police has been used. A number of people in this room, feel free to raise your hands, a number of people in this room have had encounters with the Capitol Police. Yes, thank you. If you step out of line, there's no shortage of police officers. There's no shortage of jail cells. They are perfectly capable of exerting their power. But when it comes to enforcing the subpoenas and what Congress used to think of as the defense of its own existence, there is no Capitol Police. Congresswoman Zoe Lofgren replied to her constituents' demand for the use of the Capitol Police to enforce subpoenas during the last Congress and said, "Sorry, can't do it. That jail cell in the bottom of the Capitol doesn't exist anymore, and the sergeant at arms is 65 years old." Well, for the better part of U.S. history, the sergeant at arms at the command of any committee on either side of the Hill had the authority to use an entire police force, as he still does, to lock people up in a variety of jail cells, and as we all know, they've got plenty of them. The Congress chooses not to enforce its own subpoenas, chooses not to impeach. They have rewritten Article 2, Section 4, which now reads, "The President, the Vice President, and all civil officers of the United States shall be removed from office upon impeachment for and conviction of treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors involving sex." This is the new language of the Constitution. They just impeached a judge for groping employees. I'm not applauding that behavior. But Jay Bybee authored memos giving every future president the power of aggressive war in his hands alone. Memos authorizing torture, personalized, custom torture prescriptions for individuals. This guy can be tortured in this way up to 18 times. This guy, Jay Bybee, has a lifetime appointment as an appeals court judge in the Ninth Circuit. And they're thinking, our so-called representatives on Capitol Hill, their thinking is, but if we impeached him, the corporate media would accuse us of going after a conservative judge. Who the hell cares? Are the people going to fall for that? Is nobody going to notice that he's being impeached for legalizing torture? Is that conservatism? Or is enforcing our laws conservatism? What is conservative about torture? If you cannot impeach that man for whom all of the nonsensical excuses not to impeach Bush and Cheney do not apply, you cannot impeach anyone except for sex. And that's what we're down to. And if you will not enforce your subpoenas, you will not have power. Senator Leahy, chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, asked Jay Bybee when these torture memos came out, would you mind? Would it be too much trouble, Your Honor, if if it wasn't out of your way to come to Washington and talk to us? And Mr. Bybee said, "Go to hell." And Senator Leahy said, "Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I'll do that. How high should I jump?" And that's where they leave it. Dozens and dozens of subpoenas from the last Congress, unenforced. Dick Cheney, Condoleezza Rice. No, I'm not inclined to comply. I'm going to ignore that subpoena. And just left that way. They don't reintroduce them. They don't send them again. They just let it lie. They take a couple of subpoenas for Karl Rove and Harriet Miers, and they have the White House lawyer, Rove's buddy, negotiate partial compliance in secret, at least initially, with subpoenas. Negotiating between the first branch of our government and a common criminal and member of the corporate media, if that's not redundant. And they negotiate on his behalf. It's an outrage, an absolute outrage. And the Congress has no willingness to use its own power. It fears nothing more than its own power because it is the branch of government accountable to us. It's where we need to put the power. We also need Congress to do what Congressman Conyers proposed in January and hasn't lifted his little finger to do in the past 8 months, and that is to extend the statutes of limitations on many of the major crimes of the past 8 years because they're ticking away. Number 8, if I can't get disagreement on this one, I don't know what I'm doing. Number 8, Sarah Palin was right. When Sarah Palin said that her job as vice president would be to be in charge of the Senate, and everybody laughed at her, I think she was right. I think that should be the job of the vice president. It is one of them, but I think it should be the job of the vice president. When you have a vice president who is part of the executive branch, much less running it, like we had for the past 8 years, then you can't impeach the president because everybody screams in horror of the vice president. And you can't impeach the vice president because then you've still got the president to impeach. You have to do a double impeachment. This was not the intention. We were supposed to have a vice president who sat on a bench in case, as reserve, which meant he was not involved in the president's crimes and abuses. much less bragging about his felonies on television every week. And we had Dick Cheney claim to be part of the executive branch when he didn't want to comply with the subpoena, and claim to be part of the legislative branch when he didn't want to reveal secrets as required by executive rules. And so we had this fourth branch. I think the way you do away with that, ideally, is to bar executive power for the vice president and leave him, in fact, as Sarah Palin would have had it, in charge of the Senate, or at least voting for ties and officiating at the Senate. Number 9, you do not need a piece of legislation to end a war, and you also do not need the United States Senate to end a war. The House of Representatives can put the damn checkbook away, and that's all that's needed. Number 10. We've discussed that so many times in this very room. I'm going to leave it at that, unless you all want to talk about it, but it's still little known and little understood. Number 10, there is nothing romantic about a filibuster. You don't have to stand up. If you did stand up, you would still be a corrupt, sold-out billionaire purporting to represent us in an anti-democratic vestige of a bygone era called the United States Senate. The filibuster allows mostly men who represent 12% of Americans to block all legislation in the Senate, and therefore all legislation in the House. There is nothing more anti-democratic. The Supreme Court comes close, but there is nothing more anti-democratic than the filibuster. And there is no excuse for keeping it around. And the Democrats will tell you, well, we got to keep it around for when the Republicans are back in charge. We can then oppose anything Republicans decide to do on behalf of the majority of Americans. Well, by doing this, they guarantee that, in fact, the Republican Party, which was looking like it was in its last steps on earth, is going to be back in charge. And I don't care if you get one bill through with a reconciliation process. You still leave every other bill of any worth on any issue blocked by the filibuster. It's not in the Constitution. As we might have tried to explain to these folks yesterday, it's not even in the Bible. The filibuster is a rule. You just change it with 51 senators. You can do it tomorrow. You can put in the Employee Free Choice Act the next day. You can bring back single-payer health care next year. You can move this nation forward. You can do what the people of this country want without the most anti-democratic piece of the Senate. But if you start thinking in the longer term, and in my book I go into a longer term vision on many of these topics, what are we doing with the Senate itself anyway? What good has it possibly ever done anyone? What issue through the course of U.S. history has the House not been out ahead of the Senate on? Right? 8 times bills banning slavery. Why would we keep the Senate around if we held a constitutional convention? What good does it do anyone? We say, oh, well, it gives equal representation to the small states, and we have a federal system, and states need to be represented. Well, that ought to include Washington, D.C. for one thing, but the people in those states, their positions in opinion polls are much better represented by the House. The senators are much more corrupted by money. The states are much more homogenous than were the 13 colonies. And you know what? The popular states, where all the people move and retire and settle and go to college, are popular for a reason. People like the policies in those states. When everybody starts moving to Wyoming, it will be because something changed in Wyoming from what it is now. You look at what the Senate does to state power. It is Max Baucus's bill on health care, not the House bill, that slips in a little line that says, no state regulation of health care. That's the Senate that does that stuff. It does not support the power of small states. It supports the power of big money. Nothing else. Nothing else. It has been the enemy of progress for far too long. If you have any doubt where the Senate is, you know, I drove in here listening to nice polite Republicans, or National Petroleum Radio, or NPR if you prefer. I listen to C-SPAN, I listen to Deface the Nation. I mean, I listen to all these shows driving in here. And in every single one of them, they accused anybody who was talking about single payer or the public option. And they accused the progressives in the House of not being able to do math, of being ignorant, out-of-touch wackos who can't even do math because the Senate will not, as a law of physics, pass the public option. Now, you could have done the exact opposite. You could have said, here's a head count in the House. The House won't pass anything that doesn't have the public option. The senators are all a bunch of wackos who can't do math. That would have been a different piece of the available facts with a different spin. But watch, pay attention to the media from here on out on every issue, and you will see that it's always the Senate that's serious and knows how to do math. Number 11. Most Americans are smart and sane and powerful. Little known. If you look at opinion polls, we are so much smarter, so much more sophisticated, so much more generous than our televisions tell us. And we are so much more active and engaged. If you get involved in activist groups, if you hunt out the media that will inform you properly, we are much more engaged, not nearly enough, disgracefully little, but so much more than we are told. We drove Alberto Gonzalez out of this town. We have prevented a war on Iran by exposing the lies on Iraq. We have turned this nation against wars. This nation is against the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and Pakistan and doesn't want one in Iran. We prevented Bush pardoning his cronies' crimes. We have slowed recruitment in the military. Yesterday, 7 people went to jail and hundreds protested at the Army Experience Center outside of Philadelphia, in a shopping mall, an amusement park for killing people, for kids, set up across from a video arcade for kids. Millions and millions of our dollars put into recruiting children to love killing people. Preemptively, a couple days before this long-planned protest, the military, the Army, put out news that they're probably going to shut this place down and not open any new ones as planned in other shopping malls. It's important to applaud, and you're applauding the people who did this, the activists all over the country who've gone many times to this shopping mall outside of Philadelphia, and 7 of them who spent the night last night downtown in the Central Jail in Philadelphia. Because the story in the media was that the Army was going to shut these down because the lousy economy had boosted recruitment so much they just didn't need them anymore and didn't want that expense. Think of how crazy that is as a news story. This is pocket change to the richest organization in the world, and they never have as many recruits as they want. They put out a story that of course does not announce our victory for us, but we can't then go repeating their story as if that's the whole story. We have to claim these victories and spread word among each other, because we have to encourage each other, because people have to be encouraged to work. That itself doesn't make any sense to me. I think you work harder, the gloomier things look, but that's just me. Many people need to be encouraged and see victory just down the road in order to work. And there's no reason they can't have that, because we have victories every day. We just don't spread the word about them. We don't own a television network, as we should. Number 12, last point. AstroTurf is not green. That is to say, when you have oil companies pay the Heritage Foundation to say that with restraining greenhouse gases will raise your heating bill and create $4 a gallon gasoline, and then go out and organize rallies through front groups of angry people to oppose $4 a gallon gasoline, and then publicly support the bill to make it look even worse, and then get on all the talk shows to talk about it and buy up all the ads in between all the segments, and you call it a grassroots movement against restraining greenhouse gases. It's not green. It's human suicide. And you have the same thing on health care. And you have the same thing not just from the right, but from the left. Right? So you have labor unions, you have activist groups going out around the country and telling people they can't say the word single payer. They can come to a rally and rally for a public option of a certain sort with certain language, talking points already pre-approved by, not by the members of the labor union or the activist group, but by the leadership in Congress. This is a reversal of democracy. This is AstroTurf. This is not grassroots. And we are waking up to it. This is what's encouraging to me at this moment, is that people are waking up to it. People are waking up. Thousands of former Obama supporters or current, and hundreds of former Obama campaign staffers take out a big ad for $100,000 in the New York Times to say, aren't you going to do what we elected you to do and worked for you to do? Well, I disagree with funding our enemy. Don't put that money into the New York Times. I disagree with asking for a superhero rather than getting involved with good activist groups that have never strayed from what needed to be done and pushing Congress to do it. But I'm encouraged by people waking up predictably after 8 months or so to the idea of being citizens. And it is not in the least disrespectful to be a citizen in a representative republic. So it's not that we don't compromise. It's that the activist groups don't do the compromising, the Congress members do. It's an important skill for them to have, not us. And where we do compromise by supporting a bill that's only a halfway step, we don't self-censor. We don't now pretend that that bill is our ideal, which backfires in all number of ways. Imagine the peace movement we would have right now if John McCain were president. This gives you an idea of the self-censorship, of the astroturfing, of the defunding of citizen engagement exactly when it could be most useful. Right? We're willing to get out and work and fund and be active for peace and justice and social change when it's absolutely impossible. But as soon as there's a glimmer of hope for it, we defund all the groups that have shut down completely, and others have demobilized 90%. Not the way to do it. And we're turning that around now. People are waking up now. And this is what's very encouraging to me. This is why people's despair is giving me hope. And I hope as they come to a better realization, it is giving them more hope as well. I hope that that day is going to break. I called my book Daybreak. I'm especially encouraged that people are going to try to create a new peace movement the beginning of next month. And October 5th in this town, there are going to be major demonstrations and civil resistance actions, protests, and people risking arrest at the White House. Could not persuade anyone to make Congress a key target. It has to be the White House, it has to be the Emperor. But I think when we get that out of our system, people will be willing to lobby Congress as well. There are going to be conferences and workshops on war and how to end it that previous weekend, October 3rd and 4th in this town, and then these actions on Monday, October 5th. No, not a Saturday march, an attempt to get in the way of the people doing these things on a weekday, on a Monday. And many of you are from this area. I hope you can be there and help. The specific website for that is nogoodwar.org, but you can go to afterdowningstreet.org and connect with anything I've mentioned. I would love to sign a book for you, a book for your local library, one for your congress member, and two for your senators, or however many you choose to pick up. And I'd like to open this up to questions and discussion. Thanks for coming out.